Hello, welcome to Shad Life, where I provide the knowledge I have gained from over 40 years of BMX and mountain biking and provide it to you awesome people. Today, we're going to talk about stack. What is stack? Well, it's the height of the frame right at this point. We're going to talk about how that's measured in just a moment. Before you get into this video, you really need to watch my video on effective top tube and reach, because those two things also play a role in this whole area that we like to call the cockpit. So that video's right up there in the corner. Click on that, watch that first, and come back to this one. Otherwise, you're kind of be a little lost on this one. I mean, you could watch this one first and then watch that one second if that's the way you prefer to do it, since you're already watching this one. Anyway, let's get into talking about stack and why it matters. Okay, so first we're going to talk about what stack is or how you measure it, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about why it matters and what different elements of the bike affect that measurement. It gets really complicated because there's a lot of different things that are going to change the stack height of your frame. So we'll start out with what it is and how to measure it. Stack is the measurement from center of your bottom bracket to parallel to the floor from this top of your frame headset here, going straight back, and then that measurement between the bottom bracket and that line that you see drawn here. So that is stack. And why it matters is it's really going to determine how tall the front end of your frame is. And I specifically say frame because it doesn't count how many spacers you have in here, how much of a height elevation your stem has, because some stems do have height elevation, or the rise in your handlebars. None of that affects stack. Those are things you can change and adjust to fine tune it, but you really want to start from where the frame is and get the stack height that's ideal for the type of riding you want to do. So if we're thinking about the seated position, where it's going to matter is it's going to determine how tall the front end is and whether you are more upright or more lean forward. And in a standing position, it's going to determine your leverage. If you've seen the video I've talked about before about rad, that's kind of that line diagonal from bottom bracket to where your hands are roughly on the grips. That is going to determine how much leverage you have based on your body geometry. We're not going to talk about rad, we're going to just talk about stack, but it does affect kind of where you are positioned and how tall you are on the bike to where you can have your weight further back over the rear wheel, or if you have a lower stack, it's going to lower your hands, right? And going to determine how leaned over you are. All these different parts of a bike will affect your stack. A big part of what affects it is the amount of travel you have in your fork. If you have a cross-country bike and you're running a 100 millimeter, 110, 120, which is typical for a cross-country bike, that's going to lower this point of your frame unless the manufacturer makes a longer head tube to compensate for it. But generally they don't, because cross-country riders want to be lower and in a more performance kind of almost like road bike racing position, right? It's more aerodynamic, it helps with climbs when you get into steeper climbs, being more forward, puts more weight towards the front of the bike, all those things. But being in that position makes it more difficult to pull up the front end. It makes it more difficult when you're standing to jump, control the bike, things like that. Cross-country bikes are evolving pretty rapidly these days because the courses have become more aggressive and technical features, drops, sometimes jumps are becoming part of cross-country courses. So that style of bike is evolving quite a bit these days. Then we get into, this trail, enduro, free ride category of bike. Well, then we get much longer travel forks. On this bike, we got a 150 millimeter travel fork. That's going to bring the front of the bike up quite a bit more. And that's kind of the desired effect you want. You want a taller front end. First of all, in a seated position, it just makes you more comfortable being more upright. And in a standing position, it really gives you that ideal attack bike control position, pulling up on the front end, because I can get my weight more easily back over the rear wheel, which is where you want it when you want to pull up the front end. You don't want your weight forward. You don't want your arms way out here when you're trying to pull up. That's that lever part. Your lever, as you go down or out, is going to be much harder. If it's up and back, it's going to be much easier. You shorten that lever, and then your body and your strength can overcome it easier. That's kind of what the rad measurement is all about. And stack plays a role, reach plays a role. Effective top tube doesn't really play that much of a role in the rad measurement. So, this is ideally what we want, is good standing technical control over the bike. And having a taller front end helps you have that, but it isn't the most performance fastest body position to be in unless you're pointed downhill, because pointing downhill you need that control, and the courses are generally more technical. So that is stack, basically this point. The other thing that affects stack is your BB drop, which is something I'll talk about in a future video, because that determines whether you're riding in the bike or more on top of the bike, things like that, which also can affect handling a little bit. So this whole bike setup and kind of cockpit conversation can get really complicated, which is why I broke it up into multiple videos, and then I will come up with a video that's just kind of like the general conclusion of how you go about approaching this complexity, right? So stack, it's an important number. It's not talked about a lot. Those three numbers, stack, reach, and effective top tube, are really going to be your starting point with the frame, and then you can do small adjustments. And I do say small. You don't want to have a huge stack of spacers here, and as you add more spacers, you actually bring the bars closer to you, and you don't necessarily want that. So adding spacers doesn't bring the bars straight up, it brings them back and up. So think about that before you go, oh, I don't want to cut my fork and I'm going to just have this huge stack of spacers and your bars, your stem way up here. The better way to raise the front end if you want it up is to get a taller rise bar. And bars come in all different kinds of rises. And so you can go anywhere from 0, 10 millimeter, 20 millimeters, all the way up to 80 millimeters. Like, there's quite a range of rise bars, and that's how you really want to fine tune the front end. Stem length, things like that will also affect where you are here. So all of that plays an important role in kind of this ideal position. If you're new to mountain biking, this is going to be way overwhelming for you. And so what you really want to focus on is just getting a bike that fits you properly. And we'll talk about that in a future video of how do you go about purchasing a bike for somebody who's just getting into the sport, and all of this stuff is just way over their heads. So that's stack. I know I talked about a lot, but it's a big deal actually, and it's not talked about enough. Cool. I so badly want to go ride when I sit on my bike. It's like middle of winter. I'm going insane. I want to ride on the dirt. Okay, so that is stack. And I talked about a bunch of other stuff because it's not so simple. It's not, you can't just go off of this one measurement. There's all kinds of other factors that play a role in that. I will talk about BB drop in a video soon, continuing on this bike setup. Also, if you like the content of my channel, please hit the subscribe button. That helps me out, and it also gets my video in your feed. So when I come out with a new video, you'll see it in the feed. If you want a notification, hit the bell. I don't really like notifications popping up on my computer, so I rarely hit the bell. I just go look at my YouTube feed of the channels I follow. And hitting the subscribe button will do that, and it'll support me and help you get more of this kind of information, as well as riding. It is the middle of winter, so that's why there's not a ton of riding on my channel. There just isn't a whole lot of places to ride. Occasionally you'll see fat biking, so I do a lot of this kind of content when we're kind of in the off season, although with fat biking there isn't really an off season. And then, here in a couple of months I'll get back to a lot more riding videos, a lot more how-tos, and more active kind of things. And as people may know, I have the MTB hopper set up. I go up to Cuyuna a lot and ride a bunch of other trails and do reviews. And I do have, I'm not 100% sure I'm going, but I'm thinking of going to Bentonville here at the end of February, early March. Of course, I'll have that on there. So all that content will be on my channel. Trying to keep it fun, trying to keep it interesting, and yeah, there's a lot out there. Anyway, I really appreciate your support from my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace.